All right. Hello, OAS family. We're here with another book review today. And today we are going to be reviewing Landscape Lessons, Book 1 by Ning Yeh. So before we get into the particulars, the general dimension, the general statistics on the book is it is 8.25 inches tall by 11 3/4 inches wide, and it is approximately 140 pages, and the instruction is completely in English. All right, so without further ado, we're going to get right into it here. So I think this is a very unique landscape book because of the level of detail that's in it. I think in general, what makes Ning Yeh's books unique is the level of artist that he is and the connection that he has to the tradition of Chinese painting, and also his command of the English language and the fact that he has so much experience teaching. So I don't think you'll see better books out there that match sort of the quality of compositions that are presented with someone who has such a command of the English language and has so much experience showing things in a way that are effective from a teaching standpoint. So we're going to get into it here. We have a preface, and then we go into the basics of the setup. So there is materials here, always valuable because the materials are all mapped to OAS materials, so it's super clear about what you need and where to get it. We get into the colors here, so the various types of colors, and then the color chart. Getting into the brushes, different brushes and what they're used for. And then we start to get into the technique. So this is also very valuable, having these pure technique pieces and having them illustrated so clearly. Look at how much detail there is when he gets into this sort of color loading on the brush and then the way to stroke the brush to get this faded color. Very critical technique. It's used over and over again, and it's described in pretty good detail in this book here. All right, so then we get into the wash brush here, how we do the same thing with the wash brush, and then various other types of strokes, shading, line work, etc., etc. And then we get into the compositional techniques, which are super interesting and very valuable. So he goes over like sort of different compositional techniques and the theory behind them and whatnot. And then we finish up with a guide to the symbols that he's going to use in the lesson, and we are immediately start on our first lesson, which is this simpler lesson called Fields. So you can see the final composition here, then a description step by step on how to proceed. We have a diagram clearly that maps the painting out into quadrants. And then we have a steps breakdown about how to do the tree dots and the lines, going through step by step, filling it in. The next step, doing the mountains in the background. And then how to do the shading for the mist. And we finish up with this final diagram there. All right, so then the next painting is Sunset. So here we get into a little bit of background information on the scene here, inspired by one of the trips to China, diagram of the composition, and then again, step by step, going through a breakdown of what to do next. Pine needles first, filling in with the tree branch, and then the details of the pagoda, the sun. And the compositions start to pick up in ambition. Now that you've sort of gotten the approach, he feels more confident to include more elements in a composition that has a little bit more ambition. So we see this in these reflections. All right, so sort of detailing the first steps of the reflections, showing the diagram, going through step 2, which is the coloration, different colorations on the different elements. And this is what step 2 likes finished. And then you get into step 3, which is mist and shadows. And step 4. So this is a kind of an unprecedented amount of instruction for landscape painting. Landscape painting is a bit trickier because the technique is more complex and it's difficult to cover in a real stroke by stroke way, but he does a very, very good job of finding a way to detail the information that you need to finish each of these paintings. So this is lesson 4, which is the village. Again, a little bit of a historical context or cultural context behind the location and inspiration for this painting. And then showing the draft with the line work. And then starting step 2, which is the outlines and the trees. And we get some fill-ins on the houses, rendering the distant scenery. And then finishing up this composition here. And then the next one is this lovely snow scene. This is the first one that we see featuring snow. We see this really great river running through this small village. Sort of introduction and step 1 of the snow scene. Seeing the line work here. Then step 2, coloring. And step 3, additional coloring. Get into the details of here of how to render the sky and the water. And then how to fill in with dots, happy dots. And then lesson 6 is waterfalls. This really majestic sort of split waterfall featured in this composition. Background and introduction into the first couple steps. You see his draft with the outlines. And then he starts with this rock, the diagram of the rock texture. We have coloration here. And then showing how the coloration plays out. And then adding shading to define the water. And then the next step, showing mist, dots, and trees, with the finished painting being there. All right. Then the next one is Westlake in the spring. So Westlake is the city of Hangzhou. So you can see here an introduction into the area. And then step 1, which are these trees in the foreground. And showing the line work for step 2. Lines and coloration. Mist, sky, and water, and then adding the blossoms. And then here we see the finishing touches and revisiting the final composition. And then we present the next one, which is lesson 8, which is this garden scene, featuring all these structures here in this little pond. background of the inspiration for this, which is the sister city to Hangzhou, which is Suzhou. So the foreground elements. And the rocks, trees, rocks, and shadows. Background building. Main building quarters. Shade and shadows. And how to do the reflections of the structures in the water. And then step 7, which is the coloration. And then step 8, which is finishing the coloration of the sky and the water. Step 9 is this yellow mountain landscape. So we got a background on Yellow Mountain, which is an incredibly powerful place. If any of you have been there before, the scenery is just breathtaking. And the mountains there are so unusual looking. So we get a draft sketch here. Then the lines and the ink work, foliage, coloring, the mist, then we do the wash to finish up the painting. Then lesson 10 is the Silk Road. So background on the inspiration for the Silk Road. And the draft of the painting, the sketch. And then how we start by rendering the sand dunes in the background. And then the banks. And then the buildings. Then here are those elements all together. Then the lake. Step 6, the coloration of the sky. And this is Cypress and Waterfalls. Background on this painting, how we do the tree trunks, foliage, the waterfall line work, then the ink and the dots, the coloration, the sky and the mist. And then our next composition, which is this sunrise composition with this lake reflection. Background on this painting, how we do the banks and the boat. And the front mountains. And the distant mountains. And the reflections. Sky and the water. And then lesson 13, which is the valley. Background on this scene. And here's the composition. How to do the mountain. How we do the tree grove. Then the line work for the bottom of the painting. top half of the line work. Then the ink work. And the coloration of the field. And then the distant hills in the sky to finish up the painting. And here's this cherry blossom with the pagoda in the distance. So background on the lesson, and then the detail of the building. And here's the line work for the actual painting. The coloration for the pagoda. And how to do the background wash. And the tree draft, the blossoms. The leaves and the branches. And then the blossoms and more leaves and branches. And so that is basically it. Here we finish up with a little biography. So that is basically it. Landscape Lessons Book 1 by Ning Yeh. So you can see as we featured some of these other landscape books, you can see how once you go through this book, it becomes a lot clearer how to work with books that have a lot less instruction. Because what he's doing is he's breaking things down into smaller steps and he's showing more detailed. And the techniques are actually transferred to different artists. So a lot of these other artists are using very similar techniques. They're just not showing you as much. So once you have worked through this book, you will be armed with the techniques to be able to get more value from other books on landscapes, because mostly those books, they show you more paintings, but they show you way less instruction. And so if you can go through all of these in Landscape Lessons Book 1 and you get sort of confident with the techniques that he shows you in here, then you can bring that information to your other paintings and your other work with other books and written material. So I hope you enjoyed this video book review. Make sure to subscribe and like this video if you enjoy content like this, and we wish you happy painting.